The Prince and the Pauper. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Prince and the Pauper. In the ancient city of London, on a certain autumn day in the second quarter of the 16th century, a boy was born to a poor family of the name of Canty, who did not want him. On the same day, another English child was born to a rich family of the name of Tudor, who did want him. All England wanted him too. England had so longed for him, and hoped for him, and prayed God for him, that now that he was really come, the people went nearly mad for joy. Mere acquaintances hugged and kissed each other and cried. Everybody took a holiday, and high and low, rich and poor, feasted and danced and sang, and got very mellow, and they kept this up for days and nights together. By day, London was a sight to see, with gay banners waving from every balcony and housetop, and splendid pageants marching along. By night, it was again a sight to see, with its great bonfires at every corner, and its troops of revellers making merry around them. There was no talk in all England but of the new baby, Edward Tudor, Prince of Wales, who lay lapped in silks and satins, unconscious of all this fuss, and not knowing that great lords and ladies were tending him and watching over him, and not caring, either. But there was no talk about the other baby, Tom Canty, lapped in his poor rags, except among the family of paupers whom he had just come to trouble with his presence. Chapter 2. Tom's Early Life. Let us skip a number of years. London was 1,500 years old, and was a great town, for that day. It had 100,000 inhabitants, some think double as many. The streets were very narrow, and crooked, and dirty, especially in the part where Tom Canty lived, which was not far from London Bridge. The houses were of wood, with the second story projecting over the first, and the third sticking its elbows out beyond the second. The higher the houses grew, the broader they grew. They were skeletons of strong crisscross beams, with solid material between, coated with plaster. The beams were painted red or blue or black, according to the owner's taste, and this gave the houses a very picturesque look. The windows were small, glazed with little diamond-shaped panes, and they opened outward, on hinges, like doors. The house which Tom's father lived in was up a foul little pocket called Offal Court, out of Pudding Lane. It was small, decayed, and rickety, but it was packed full of wretchedly poor families. Canty's tribe occupied a room on the third floor. The mother and father had a sort of bedstead in the corner, but Tom, his grandmother, and his two sisters, Bet and Nan, were not restricted. They had all the floor to themselves, and might sleep where they chose. There were the remains of a blanket or two, and some bundles of ancient and dirty straw, but these could not rightly be called beds, for they were not organized. They were kicked into a general pile, mornings, and selections made from the mess at night, for service. Bet and Nan were 15 years old, twins. They were good-hearted girls, unclean, clothed in rags, and profoundly ignorant. Their mother was like them, but the father and the grandmother were a couple of fiends. They got drunk whenever they could. Then they fought each other or anybody else who came in the way. They cursed and swore always, drunk or sober. John Canty was a thief, and his mother a beggar. They made beggars of the children, but failed to make thieves of them. Among, but not of, the dreadful rebel that inhabited the house was a good old priest whom the king had turned out of house and home with a pension of a few farthings, and he used to get the children aside and teach them right ways secretly. Father Andrew also taught Tom a little Latin, and how to read and write, and would have done the same with the girls, but they were afraid of the jeers of their friends, who could not have endued such a queer accomplishment in them. All Offal Court was just such another hive as Canty's house. Drunkenness, riot, and brawling were the order. They, every night and nearly all night long. Broken heads were as common as hunger in that place. Yet little Tom was not unhappy. He had a hard time of it, but did not know it. It was the sort of time that all the Offal Court boys had, therefore he supposed it was a correct and comfortable thing. When he came home empty-handed at night, he knew his father would curse him and thrash him first, and that when he was done the awful grandmother would do it all over again and improve on it, and that away in the night his starving mother would slip to him stealthily with any miserable scrap or crust she had been able to save for him by going hungry herself. Notwithstanding, she was often caught in that sort of treason and soundly beaten for it by a husband. No, Tom's life went along well enough, especially in summer. He only begged just enough to save himself, for the laws against mendicancy were stringent and the penalties heavy. So he put in a good deal of his time listening to good Father Andrew's charming old tales and legends about giants and fairies, dwarfs and genii, and enchanted castles, and gorgeous kings and princes. His head grew to be full of these wonderful things, and many a night as he lay in the dark on his scant and offensive straw, tired, hungry, and smarting from a threshing, he unleashed his imagination and soon forgot his aches and pains in delicious picturings to himself of the charmed life of a petted prince in a regal palace. One desire came in time to haunt him day and night. It was to see a real prince, with his own eyes. He spoke of it once to some of his awful court comrades, but they jeered him and scoffed him so unmercifully that he was glad to keep his dream to himself after that. He often read the priest's old books and got him to explain and enlarge upon them. His dreamings and readings worked certain changes in him, by and by. His dream people were so fine that he grew to lament his shabby clothing and his dirt, and to wish to be clean and better clad. He went on playing in the mud just the same, and enjoying it, too, but instead of splashing around in the Thames solely for the fun of it, he began to find an added value in it because of the washings and cleansings it afforded. Tom could always find something going on around the Maypole in Cheapside, and at the Fays, and now and then he and the rest of London had a chance to see a military parade when some famous unfortunate was carried prisoner to the Tower, by land or boat. One summer's day he saw Poor and Askew and 3 men burned at the stake in Smithfield, and heard an ex-bishop preach a sermon to them which did not interest him. Yes, Tom's life was varied and pleasant enough, on the whole. By and by Tom's reading and dreaming about princely life wrought such a strong effect upon him that he began to act the prince unconsciously. His speech and manners became curiously ceremonious and courtly, to the vast admiration and amusement of his intimates. But Tom's influence among these young people began to grow now, day by day, and in time he came to be looked up to, by them, with a sort of wondering awe, as a superior being. He seemed to know so much, and he could do and say such marvelous things, and withal he was so deep and wise. Tom's remarks and Tom's performances were reported by the boys to their elders, and these, also, presently began to discuss Tom Canty, and to regard him as a most gifted and extraordinary creature. Full-grown people brought their perplexities to Tom for solution, and were often astonished at the wit and wisdom of his decisions. In fact, he was become a hero to all who knew him except his own family. These, only, saw nothing in him. Privately, after a while, Tom organized a royal court. He was a prince. His special comrades were guards, chamberlains, equerries, lords and ladies in waiting, and the royal family. Daily the mock prince was received with elaborate ceremonials borrowed by Tom from his romantic readings. Daily the great affairs of the mimic kingdom were discussed in the royal council, and daily his mimic highness issued decrees to his imaginary armies, navies, and viceroyalties. After which, he would go forth in his rags and beg a few farthings, eat his poor crust, take his customary cuffs and abuse, and then stretch himself upon his handful of foul straw, and resume his empty grandeurs in his dreams. And still his desire to look just once upon a real prince, in the flesh, grew upon him day by day and week by week, until at last it absorbed all other desires, and became the one passion of his life. One January day, on his usual begging tour, he tramped despondently up and down the region round about Mincing Lane and Little Eastcheap, hour after hour, barefooted and cold, looking in at cook-shop windows and longing for the dreadful pork pies and other deadly inventions displayed there, for to him these were dainties fit for the angels. That is, judging by the smell, they were, for it had never been his good luck to own and eat one. There was a cold drizzle of rain. The atmosphere was murky. It was a melancholy day. At night Tom reached home so wet and tired and hungry that it was not possible for his father and grandmother to observe his forlorn condition and not be moved, after their fashion. Wherefore they gave him a brisk cuffing at once and sent him to bed. For a long time his pain and hunger, and the swearing and fighting going on in the building, kept him awake, but at last his thoughts drifted away to far, romantic lands, and he fell asleep in the company of jeweled and gilded princelings who live in vast palaces, and had servants alarming before them or flying to execute their orders. And then, as usual, he dreamed that he was a princeling himself, All night long the glories of his royal estate shone upon him. He moved among great lords and ladies, in a blaze of light, breathing perfumes, drinking in delicious music, and answering the reverent obeisances of the glittering throng as it parted to make way for him, with hair smile and there a nod of his princely head. And when he awoke in the morning and looked upon the wretchedness about him, his dream had had its usual effect. It had intensified the sordidness of his surroundings 1,000-fold. Then came bitterness, and heartbreak, and tease. Chapter 3. Tom's Meeting with the Prince. Tom got up hungry, and sauntered hungry away, but with his thoughts busy with the shadowy splendors of his night's dreams. He wandered here and there in the city, hardly noticing where he was going, or what was happening around him. People jostled him, and some gave him rough speech, but it was all lost on the musing boy. By and by he found himself at Temple Bar, the farthest from home he had ever traveled in that direction. He stopped and considered a moment, then fell into his imaginings again, and passed on outside the walls of London. The Strand had ceased to be a country road then, and regarded itself as a street, but by a strained construction, for, though there was a tolerably compact row of houses on one side of it, there were only some scattered great buildings on the other, these being palaces of rich nobles, with ample and beautiful grounds stretching to the river, grounds that are now closely packed with grim acres of brick and stone. At each side of the gilded gate stood a living statue, that is to say, an erect and stately and motionless man-at-arms, clad from head to heel in shining steel armor. At a respectful distance were many country folk, and people from the city, waiting for any chance glimpse of royalty that might offer. Splendid carriages, with splendid people in them and splendid servants outside, were arriving and departing by several other noble gateways that pierced the royal enclosure. Poor little Tom, in his rags, approached, and was moving slowly and timidly past the sentinels, with a beating heart and a rising hope, when all at once he caught sight through the golden bars of a spectacle that almost made him shout for joy. Within was a comely boy, tan and brown, with sturdy outdoor sports and exercises, whose clothing was all of lovely silks and satins, shining with jewels. At his hip a little jeweled sword and dagger, dainty buskins on his feet, with red heels, and on his head a jaunty crimson cap, with drooping plumes fastened with a great sparkling gem. Several gorgeous gentlemen stood near, his servants, without a doubt. Oh, he was a prince, a living prince, a real prince, without the shadow of a question, and the prayer of the Pauper boy's heart was answered at last. Tom's breath came quick and short with excitement, and his eyes grew big with wonder and delight. Everything gave way in his mind instantly to one desire, that was to get close to the prince and have a good, devouring look at him. Before he knew what he was about, he had his face against the gate bars. The next instant one of the soldiers snatched him rudely away, and sent him spinning among the gaping crowd of country gawks and London idlers. The soldier said, "Mind thy manners, thou young beggar." The crowd jeered and laughed, but the young prince sprang to the gate with his face flushed and his eyes flashing with indignation, and cried out. The soldiers presented arms with their halberds, opened the gates, and presented again as the little Prince of Poverty passed in his fluttering rags, to join hands with the Prince of Limitless Plenty. Edward Tudor said, "What is thy name, lad?" "Tom Canty, and it please thee, sir." "'Tis an odd one. Where dost live?" "Parents have I, sir, and a grandam likewise that is but indifferently precious to me. God forgive me if it be offense to say it. Also twin sisters, Nan and Bet." "Then is thy grandam not overkind to thee, I take it?" "Neither to any other is she, so please your worship. She hath a wicked heart, and worketh evil all her days." "Doth she mistreat thee?" "There be times that she stayeth her hand, being asleep or overcome with drink. But when she hath a judgment clear again, she maketh it up to me with goodly beatings." A fierce look came into the little prince's eyes, and he cried out, "What? Beatings? Oh, indeed, yes, please you, sir. Beatings, and thou so frail and little. Hark ye, before the night come, she shall hie her to the tower. The king my father. In sooth, You forget, sir, her low degree. The tower is for the great alone. True, indeed. I had not thought of that. I will consider of her punishment. Is thy father kind to thee? Not more than Canty, sir. She is good, sir, and giveth me neither sorrow nor pain of any sort. And Nan and Bet are like to her in this. How old be these? 15, and it please you, sir. The Lady Elizabeth, my sister, is 14, and the Lady Jane Grey, my cousin, is of mine own age, and comely and gracious withal. But my sister the Lady Mary, with a gloomy mien, and, look you, do thy sisters forbid their servants to smile, lest the sin destroy their souls. They? Oh, dost think, sir, that they have servants? The little prince contemplated the little pauper gravely a moment, then said, And prithee, why not, who helpeth them undress at night? Who adhereth them when they rise? None, sir. Would St. have them take off their garment, and sleep without, like the beasts. Their garment, have they but one? Ah, good your worship, what would they do with more? Truly they have not two bodies each. It is a quaint and marvellous thought. Thy pardon, I had not meant to laugh. But thy good Nan and thy Bet shall have raiment and lackeys enow, and that soon, too, my coffers shall look to it. No, thank me not. 'Tis nothing. Thou speakest well. Thou hast an easy grace in it. Art learned. I know not if I am or not, sir. The good priest that is called Father Andrew taught me of his kindness from his books. Knowest thou the Latin? But scantly, sir, I doubt. Learn it, lad. 'Tis hard only at first. The Greek is harder, but neither these nor any tongues else, I think, are hard to the Lady Elizabeth and my cousin. Thou shouldest hear those damsels at it. But tell me of thy awful court. A stout pleasant life they. In truth, yes, so please you. So, say when one is hungry. There be Punch and Judy shows, and monkeys, oh such antic creatures, and so bravely dressed, and there be plays wherein they that play do shout and fight till all is slain, and 'tis so fine to see, and costeth but a farthing, albeit 'tis main hard to get the farthing, please your worship. Tell me more. We lads of awful court do strive against each other with the cudgel, like to the fashion of the prentices, sometimes. The prince's eyes flashed. Said he, Marry, that would not I mislike. Tell me more. We strive in races, sir, to see who of us shall be fleetest. That would I like also. Speak on. In summer, sir, we wade and swim in the canals and in the river, and each doth duck his neighbor, and splatter him with water, and dive and shout and tumble, and 'twould be worth my father's kingdom but to enjoy it once. Prithee go on. We dance and sing about the maypole in Cheapside. We play in the sand, each covering his neighbor up, and times we make mud pastry. Oh, the lovely mud! It hath not its like for delightfulness in all the world. We do fairly wallow in the mud, sir, saving your worship's presence. Oh, prithee, say no more. 'Tis glorious. If that I could but clothe me in raiment like to thine, and strip my feet, and revel in the mud once, just once, with none to rebuke me or forbid, meseemeth I could forego the crown. And if that I could clothe me once, sweet sir, as thou art clad, just once. Oh, wouldest thee like it? Then so shall it be. Doff thy rags, and don these splendors. Lad, it is a brief happiness, but will be not less keen for that. We will have it while we may, and change again before any come to molest. A few minutes later, the little Prince of Wales was garlanded with Tom's fluttering odds and ends, and the little Prince of Pauperdom was tricked out in the gaudy plumage of royalty. The two went and stood side by side before a great mirror, and lo, a miracle, there did not seem to have been any change made. They stared at each other, then at the glass, then at each other again. At last the puzzled princeling said, What dost thou make of this? Ay, good your worship, require me not to answer. It is not meet that one of my degree should utter the thing. Then will I utter it. Thou hast the same hay, the same eyes, the same voice and manner, the same form and stature, the same face and countenance that I bear. Fared we forth naked. There is none could say which was you, and which the Prince of Wales. And now that I am clothed as thou wert clothed, it seemeth I should be able to more nearly to feel as thou didst when the brute soldier. Harkye, is not this a bruise upon your hand? Yes, but it is a slight thing, and your worship knoweth that the poor man-at-arms. Peace. It was a shameful thing and a cruel, cried the little prince, stamping his bare foot. If the king, stir not a step till I come again. It is a command. In a moment he had snatched up and put away an article of national importance that lay upon a table, and was out at the door and flying through the palace grounds in his bannered rags, with a hot face and glowing eyes. As soon as he reached the great gate, he seized the bars and tried to shake them, shouting, "Open! Unbar the gates!" The soldier that had maltreated Tom obeyed promptly, and as the prince burst through the portal, half smothered with royal wrath, the soldier fetched him a sounding box on the ear that sent him whirling to the roadway, and said, "Take that, thou beggar's spawn, for what thou got hast steal me from his highness." The crowd roared with laughter. The prince picked himself out of the mud, and made fiercely at the sentry, shouting, "I am the Prince of Wales, my person is sacred, and thou shalt hang for laying thy hand upon me." The soldier brought his halberd to a present arms and said mockingly, "I salute your gracious highness." Then angrily, "Be off, thou crazy rubbish." Here the jeering crowd closed round the poor little prince, and hustled him far down the road, hooting him and shouting, "Way for his royal highness, way for the Prince of Wales." Chapter 4. The prince's troubles begin. Right gladly will they serve the son of him who hath done so generously by them, and the more that that son is himself as poor and as forlorn as any that be sheltered here this day, or ever shall be. He was soon in the midst of a crowd of boys who were running, jumping, playing at bowl and leapfrog, and otherwise disporting themselves, and right noisily, too. The boys stopped their play and flocked about the prince, who said with native dignity, "Good lads, say to your master that Edward Prince of Wales desireth speech with him." A great shout went up at this, and one rude fellow said, "Marry, art thou his grace's messenger? Beggar." The prince's face flushed with anger, and his ready hand flew to his hip, but there was nothing there. There was a storm of laughter, and one boy said, "Didst mark that? He fancied he had a sword, but like he is the prince himself." This sally brought more laughter. Poor Edward drew himself up proudly and said, "I am the prince, and it'll beseemeth you that feed upon the king my father's bounty to use me so." Ho! Swine, slaves, pensioners of his grace's princely father, where be your manners? Down on your marrow bones, all of ye, and do reverence to his kingly port and royal rags. With boisterous mirth they dropped upon their knees in a body, and did mock homage to their prey. The prince spurned the nearest boy with his foot, and said fiercely, "Take thou that, till the morrow come and I build thee a gibbet." Then followed such a thing as England had never seen before. The sacred person of the heir to the throne rudely buffeted by plebeian hands, and set upon and torn by dogs. He kept muttering to himself, "Awful court, that is the name. If I can but find it before my strength is wholly spent and I drop, then am I saved. For his people will take me to the palace and prove that I am none of theirs, but the true prince, and I shall have mine own again." And now and then his mind reverted to his treatment by those rude Christ Hospital boys, and he said, "When I am king, they shall not have bread and shelter only, but also teachings out of books. For a full belly is little worth where the mind is starved, and the heart. I will keep this diligently in my remembrance, that this day's lesson be not lost upon me, and my people suffer thereby, for learning softeneth the heart and breedeth gentleness and charity." The lights began to twinkle, it came on to rain, the wind rose, and a raw and gusty night set in. The houseless prince, the homeless heir to the throne of England, still moved on, drifting deep into the maze of squalid alleys where the swarming hives of poverty and misery were massed together. Suddenly a great drunken ruffian collared him and said, The prince twisted himself loose, unconsciously brushed his profane shoulder, and eagerly said, "Oh, art his father, Truly? Sweet heaven grant it be so. Then wilt thou fetch him away and restore me. The man stayed down, stupefied, upon the lad, then shook his head and muttered. With this he dragged the frantic and struggling prince away, and disappeared up a front court followed by a delighted and noisy swarm of human vermin. Chapter 5. Tom as a patrician. Tom played with the jeweled dagger that hung upon his thigh. He examined the costly and exquisite ornaments of the room. He tried each of the sumptuous jays, and thought how proud he would be if the awful court herd could only peep in and see him in his grandeur. He wondered if they would believe the marvelous tale he should tell when he got home, or if they would shake their heads and say his overtaxed imagination had at last upset his reason. He walked up and down the floor, filled with nameless fears, listening, starting at every trifling sound. Presently the door swung open, and a silken page said, "The Lady Jane Grey." The door closed, and a sweet young girl, richly clad, bounded toward him, but she stopped suddenly and said in a distressed voice, "Oh, what aileth thee, my lord?" Tom's breath was nearly failing him, but he made shift to stammer out. By this time the boy was on his knees, and supplicating with his eyes and uplifted hands as well as with his tongue. The young girl seemed horror-stricken. She cried out, "O my lord, on thy knees, and to me." Then she fled away in fright, and Tom, smitten with despair, sank down, murmuring. Whilst he lay there benumbed with terror, dreadful tidings were speeding through the palace. The whisper, for it was whispered always, flew from menial to menial, from lord to lady, down all the long corridors, from story to story, from saloon to saloon. The prince had gone mad. The prince had gone mad. Soon every saloon, every marble hole, had its groups of glittering lords and ladies, and other groups of dazzling lesser folk, talking earnestly together in whispers, and every face had in it dismay. Presently a splendid official came marching by these groups, making solemn proclamation, "In the name of the king." The whispering ceased suddenly as if the whisperers had been stricken dumb. Soon there was a general buzz along the corridors of the prince. "See, the prince comes." Poor Tom was listening, as well as his dazed faculties would let him, to the beginning of this speech. But when the words "me," the good king fell upon his ear, his face blanched, and he dropped as instantly upon his knees as if a shot had brought him there. Lifting up his hands, he exclaimed, "Thou the king? Then am I undone indeed. Alack, I had believed the rumor disproportioned to the truth, but I fear me 'tis not so." He breathed a heavy sigh, and said in a gentle voice, "Come to thy father. Child, thou art not well." Tom was assisted to his feet, and approached the majesty of England, humble and trembling. The king took the frightened face between his hands, and gazed earnestly and lovingly into it a while, as if seeking some grateful sign of returning reason there, then pressed the curly head against his breast, and patted it tenderly. Presently he said, "Yea, thou art my dread lord the king, whom God preserve. I pray thee of thy grace believe me, I did but speak the truth, most dread lord, for I am the meanest among thy subjects, being a pauper born, and 'tis by a sore mischance and accident I am here, albeit I was therein nothing blameful. I am but young to die, and thou canst save me with one little word. Oh, speak it, sir." "Die? Talk not so, sweet prince. Peace, peace, to thy troubled heart, thou shalt not die." Tom dropped upon his knees with a glad cry. Tom dropped his eyes and answered humbly, "Peradventure I mistook, but I did think me free, and so was I moved to seek again the kennel where I was born and bred to misery, yet which harboureth my mother and my sisters, and so is home to me, whereas these pomps and splendours were run to I am not used. Oh, please you, sir, to let me go. Perchance he is but mad upon this one strain, and if his wits unmarred as toucheth other matter. God send it may be so. We will make trial." Then he asked Tom a question in Latin, and Tom answered him lamely in the same tongue. The lords and doctors manifested their gratification also. The king said. The physician addressed bowed low and replied, It jumpeth with my own conviction, sire, that thou hast divined aright. The king looked pleased with his encouragement, coming as it did from so excellent authority, and continued with good heart, Now mark ye all, we will try him further. He put a question to Tom in French. Tom stood silent a moment, embarrassed by having so many eyes centered upon him, then said diffidently, I have no knowledge of this tongue, so please your majesty. The king fell back upon his couch. The attendants flew to his assistance, but he put them aside and said, Were he 1,000 times mad, yet is he Prince of Wales, and I the king will confirm it. This very morrow shall he be installed in his princely dignity in due and ancient form. Take instant order for it, my lord Hertford. One of the nobles knelt at the royal couch and said, Lord Hertford said, The king's will is law, and, rising, returned to his former place. Gradually the wrath faded out of the old king's face, and he said, Thou art good to me that am unworthy, O mighty and gracious Lord, that in truth I know. But, it grieveth me to think of him that is to die, and, 'tis like thee, 'tis like thee. I know thy heart is still the same, even though thy mind has suffered hurt, for thou art ever of a gentle spirit. But this duke standeth between thee and thine honours. I will have another in his stead that shall bring no taint to his great office. Comfort thee, my prince, trouble not thy poor head with this matter. Take no thought of him, my prince, he is not worthy. Kiss me once again, and go to thy trifles and amusements, for my melody distresseth me. I am aweary, and would rest. Go with thine uncle Hertford and thy people, and come again when my body is refreshed. Tom, heavy-hearted, was conducted from the presence, for this last sentence was a death blow to the hope he had cherished that now he would be set free. Once more he heard the buzz of low voices exclaiming, the prince comes. His spirit sank lower and lower as he moved between the glittering files of bowing courtiers, for he recognized that he was indeed a captive now, and might remain forever shut up in this gilded cage, a forlorn and friendless prince, except God in his mercy take pity on him and set him free. And, turn where he would, he seemed to see floating in the air the severed head and the remembered face of the great Duke of Norfolk, the eyes fixed on him reproachfully. His old dreams had been so pleasant, but this reality was so dreary. Tom was conducted to the principal apartment of a noble suite, and made to sit down, a thing which he was loath to do, since there were elderly men and men of high degree about him. He begged them to be seated also, but they only bowed their thanks or murmured them, and remained standing. He would have insisted, but his uncle the Earl of Hertford whispered in his ear, Prithee, insist not, my lord. It is not meet that they sit in thy presence. The Lord St. John was announced, and after making obeisance to Tom, he said, I come upon the king's errand, concerning a matter which requireth privacy. Will it please your royal highness to dismiss all that attend you here, say my lord the Earl of Hertford? Observing that Tom did not seem to know how to proceed, Hertford whispered him to make a sign with his hand, and not trouble himself to speak unless he chose. When the waiting gentleman had retired, Lord St. John said, His Majesty commandeth, that for due and weighty reasons of state, the prince's grace shall hide his infirmity in all ways that be within his power, till it be past and he be as he was before, to wit, that he shall deny to none that he is a true prince, and heir to England's greatness, that he shall uphold his princely dignity, and shall receive, without word or sign of protest, that reverence and observance which unto it do appertain of right and ancient usage, that he shall cease to speak to any of that lowly birth and life his melody hath conjured out of the unwholesome imaginings of o'erwrought fancy, that he shall strive with diligence to bring unto his memory again those faces which he was wont to know, and where he faileth he shall hold his peace, neither betraying by semblance of surprise or other sign that he hath forgot, that upon occasions of state, whensoever any matter shall perplex him as to the thing he should do, or the utterance he should make, he shall show naught of unrest to the curious that look on, but take advice in that matter of the Lord Hertford, or my humble self, which are commanded of the king to be upon this service and close at call, till this commandment be dissolved. His majesty commandeth, that for due and weighty reasons of state, the prince's grace shall hide his infirmity in all ways that be within his power, till it be past and he be as he was before. Thus saith the king's majesty, who sendeth greeting to your royal highness, and prieth that God will of his mercy quickly heal you, and have you now and ever in his holy keeping. The Lord St. John made reverence and stood aside. Tom replied resignedly, The king has said it. None may palter with the king's command, or fit it to his ease, where it doth chafe with deft evasions. The king shall be obeyed. Lord Hertford said, Touching the king's majesty's ordainment concerning books and such like serious matters, it may peradventure please your highness to ease your time with lightsome entertainment, lest you go wearied to the banquet and suffer harm thereby. Tom's face showed inquiring surprise, and a blush followed when he saw Lord St. John's eyes bent sorrowfully upon him. His lordship said, I pray ye, ladies, seem not to observe his humours, nor show surprise when his memory doth lapse. It will grieve you to note how it doth stick at every trifle. Meantime Lord St. John was saying in Tom's ear. Tom signified assent with a gesture and a murmured word, for he was already learning, and in his simple heart was resolved to acquit himself as best he might, according to the king's command. Us pay thy duty to the Queen's Majesty today, my lord. Tom hesitated, looked distressed, and was about to stammer out something at hazard, when Lord St. John took the word and answered for him with the easy grace of a courtier accustomed to encounter delicate difficulties and to be ready for them. He hath indeed, madam, and she did greatly hearten him, as touching his majesty's condition. Is it not so, your highness? Tom mumbled something that stood for assent, but felt that he was getting upon dangerous ground. Somewhat later it was mentioned that Tom was to study no more at present, whereupon her little ladyship exclaimed, My father, cried Tom, off his guard for the moment. I trow he cannot speak his own so that any but the swine that kennel in the styes may tell his meaning, and as for learning of any sort soever. He looked up and encountered a solemn warning in my Lord St. John's eyes. We know it, sir, said the Princess Elizabeth, taking her brother's hand between her two palms, respectfully but caressingly. Trouble not thyself as to that. The fault is none of thine, but thy distempers. Thou art here a gentle comforter, sweet lady, said Tom, gratefully, and my heart moveth me to thank thee for tea, and I may be so bold. Once the giddy little Lady Jane fired a simple Greek phrase at Tom. The Princess Elizabeth's quick eye saw by the serene blankness of the target's front that the shaft was overshot, so she tranquilly delivered a return volley of sounding Greek on Tom's behalf, and then straightway changed the talk to other matters. Tom's guardian angels, the two lords, had less comfort in the interview than the other parties to it. They felt much as if they were piloting a great ship through a dangerous channel. They were on the alert constantly, and found their office no child's play. Wherefore, at last, when the ladies' visit was drawing to a close and the Lord Guilford Dudley was announced, they not only felt that their charge had been sufficiently taxed for the present, but also that they themselves were not in the best condition to take their ship back and make their anxious voyage all over again. So they respectfully advised Tom to excuse himself, which he was very glad to do, although a slight shade of disappointment might have been observed upon my Lady Jane's face when she heard the splendid stripling denied admittance. Have we leave of the Prince's Grace, my brother, to go? Tom said, Indeed your ladyships can have whatsoever of me they will, for the asking. Yet would I rather give them any other thing that in my poor power lieth, than leave to take the light and blessing of their presence hence. Give ye good den, and God be with ye. Then he smiled inwardly at the thought. 'Tis not for naught I have dwelt but among princes in my reading, and taught my tongue some slight trick of their broidered and gracious speech withal. When the illustrious maidens were gone, Tom turned wearily to his keepers and said, May it please your lordships to grant me leave to go into some corner and rest me. Lord Hertford said. Next the tired captive sat down and was going to take off his buskins, timidly asking leave with his eye, but another silk and velvet discomforter went down upon his knees and took the office from him. He made 2 or 3 further efforts to help himself, but being promptly forestalled each time, he finally gave up, with a sigh of resignation and a murmured, "Beshrew me, but I marvel they do not require to breathe for me also." Slippered, and wrapped in a sumptuous robe, he laid himself down at last to rest, but not to sleep, for his head was too full of thoughts and the room too full of people. He could not dismiss the former, so they stayed. He did not know enough to dismiss the latter, so they stayed also, to his vast regret, end days. Tom's departure had left his 2 noble guardians alone. They mused a while, with much head shaking and walking the floor. Then Lord St. John said, "Plainly, what dost thou think?" "Plainly, then, this: the king is near his end. My nephew is mad. Mad will mount the throne, and mad remain. God protect England, since she will need it. Verily it promiseth so, indeed. But have you no misgivings as to? Speak on. There is none to hear but me. Misgivings as to what? Peace, my lord, thou utterest treason. Us forgot the king's command? Remember I am party to thy crime if I but listen. St. John paled, and hastened to say, This is the very prince. I know him well, and soon will be thy king. It may advantage thee to bear this in mind, and more dwell upon it than the other. After some further talk, in which the Lord St. John covered up his mistake as well as he could by repeated protests that his faith was thoroughly grounded now, and could not be assailed by doubts again, the Lord Hertford relieved his fellow keeper, and sat down to keep watch and ward alone. He was soon deep in meditation, and evidently the longer he thought, the more he was bothered. By and by he began to pace the floor and mutter. Presently he said, Chapter 7. Tom's First Royal Dinner. Somewhat after 1 in the afternoon, Tom resignedly underwent the ordeal of being dressed for dinner. He found himself as finely clothed as before, but everything different, everything changed, from his ruff to his stockings. He was presently conducted with much state to a spacious and ornate apartment, where a table was already set for one. Its furniture was all of messy gold, and beautified with designs which well nigh made it priceless, since they were the work of Benvenuto. The room was half filled with noble servitors. Tom had 384 servants beside these, but they were not all in that room, of course, nor the quarter of them. Neither was Tom aware yet that they existed. All those that were present had been well drilled within the hour to remember that the prince was temporarily out of his head, and to be careful to show no surprise at his vagaries. The vagaries were soon on exhibition before them, but they only moved their compassion and their sorrow, not their mirth. It was a heavy affliction to them to see the beloved prince so stricken. Poor Tom ate with his fingers mainly, but no one smiled at it, or even seemed to observe it. He inspected his napkin curiously, and with deep interest, for it was of a very dainty and beautiful fabric, then said with simplicity, Prithee, take it away, lest in mine unheedfulness it be soiled. The hereditary diaper took it away with reverent manner, and without word or protest of any sort. At last nature broke down the barriers of etiquette. Tom lifted up an inward prayer for pardon if he was doing wrong, and brought relief to the burdened hearts of his court by scratching his nose himself. Nay, it likes me not, my lord. It hath a pretty flavour, but it wanteth strength. This new eccentricity of the prince's ruined mind made all the hearts about him ache, but the sad sight moved none to merriment. By his own request our small friend was now conducted to his private cabinet, and left there alone to his own devices. Hanging upon hooks in the oaken wainscoting were the several pieces of a suit of shining steel armor, covered all over with beautiful designs exquisitely inlaid in gold. This martial panoply belonged to the true prince, a recent present from Madame Parr the Queen. Tom put on the greaves, the gauntlets, the plumed helmet, and such other pieces as he could don without assistance, and for a while was minded to call for help and complete the matter, but bethought him of the nuts he had brought away from dinner, and the joy it would be to eat them with no crowd to eye him, and no grand hereditaries to pester him with undesired services. So he restored the pretty things to their several places, and soon was cracking nuts, and feeling almost naturally happy for the first time since God for his sins had made him a prince. Chapter 8. The Question of the Seal. His attendants perceiving that he was awake, one of them asked his pleasure concerning the Lord Chancellor, who was waiting without. Admit him, exclaimed the king eagerly. The Lord Chancellor entered and knelt by the king's couch, saying, I have given order, and, according to the king's command, the peers of the realm, in their robes, do now stand at the bar of the house, where, having confirmed the Duke of Norfolk's doom, they humbly wait his majesty's further pleasure in the matter. The king's face lit up with a fierce joy. Said he, Lift me up. In mine own person will I go before my parliament, and with mine own hand will I seal the warrant that rids me of. His voice failed. An ashen pallor swept the flush from his cheeks, and the attendants eased him back upon his pillows and hurriedly assisted him with restoratives. Presently he said sorrowfully, According to the king's command, so shall it be. Will he please your majesty to order that the seal be now restored to me, so that I may forth upon the business? The seal? Who keepeth the seal but thou? Please your majesty, you did take it from me 2 days since, saying it should no more do its office till your own royal hand should use it upon the Duke of Norfolk's warrant. The king dropped into inarticulate mumblings, shaking his grey head weakly from time to time, and gropingly trying to recollect what he had done with the seal. At last my lord Hertford ventured to kneel and offer information. Sire, if thou may be so bold, here be several that do remember with me how that you gave the great seal into the hands of his highness the Prince of Wales to keep against the day that— True, most true, interrupted the king. Fetch it. Go, time fleeth. Lord Hertford flew to Tom, but returned to the king before very long, troubled and empty-handed. He delivered himself to this effect. It grieveth me, my lord the king, to bear so heavy and unwelcome tidings, but it is the will of God that the prince's affliction abideth still, and he cannot recall to mind that he received the seal. So came I quickly to report, thinking it will waste of precious time, and little worth withal, that any should attempt to search the long array of chambers and saloons that belong unto his royal high. A groan from the king interrupted the lord at this point. After a little while his majesty said, with a deep sadness in his tone, Trouble him no more, poor child. The hand of God leath heavy upon him, and my heart girth out in loving compassion for him, and sorrow that I may not bear his burden on mine old trouble-weighted shoulders, and so bring him peace. He closed his eyes, fell to mumbling, and presently was silent. After a time he opened his eyes again, and gazed vacantly around until his glance rested upon the kneeling Lord Chancellor. Instantly his face flushed with wrath. What, thou here yet? By the glory of God, and thou gettest not about the trader's business. Thy mitre shall have holiday the morrow for lack of a head to grace withal. The trembling chancellor answered, Good your majesty, I cry you mercy. I but waited for the seal. Man, hast lost thy wits? The small seal which aforetime I was wont to take with me abroad leath in my treasury. And, since the great seal hath flown away, shall not it suffice? Hast lost thy wits? Begone, and hark ye, come no more till thou do bring his head. The poor chancellor was not long in removing himself from his dangerous vicinity, nor did the commission waste time in giving the royal assent to the work of the slavish parliament, and appointing the morrow for the beheading of the premier peer of England, the luckless Duke of Norfolk. Presently a command was given, and immediately all living creatures vanished from the steps. Now the air was heavy with the hush of suspense and expectancy. As far as one's vision could carry, he might see the myriads of people in the boats rise up and shade their eyes from the glare of lanterns and torches, and gaze toward the palace. A file of 40 or 50 state barges drew up to the steps. They were richly gilt, and their lofty prows and sterns were elaborately carved. Some of them were decorated with banners and streamers, some with cloth of gold and arras embroidered with coats of arms, others with silken flags that had numberless little silver bells fastened to them, which shook out tiny showers of joyous music whenever the breezes flooded them, others of yet higher pretensions, since they belonged to nobles in the prince's immediate service, had their sides picturesquely fenced with shields gorgeously emblazoned with armorial bearings. Each state barge was towed by a tender, besides the rowers. These tenders carried each a number of men-at-arms in glossy helmet and breastplate, and a company of musicians. The advance guard of the expected procession now appeared in the great gateway, a troop of halberdiers. They were dressed in striped hose of black and tawny, velvet caps graced at the sides with silver roses, and doublets of murrey and blue cloth, embroidered on the front and back with the 3 feathers, the prince's blazon, woven in gold. Their halberd staves were covered with crimson velvet, fastened with gilt nails, and ornamented with gold tassels. Filing off on the right and left, they formed 2 long lines, extending from the gateway of the palace to the water's edge. A thick rayed cloth of carpet was then unfolded, and laid down between them by attendants in the gold and crimson liveries of the prince. They were followed by an officer bearing the civic mace, after whom came another carrying the city sword, then several sergeants of the city guard, in their full accoutrements, and with badges on their sleeves, then the guard of king-at-arms, in his tabard, then several knights of the bath, each with a white lace on his sleeve, then their esquires, then the judges, in their robes of scarlet and coifs, then the Lord High Chancellor of England, in a robe of scarlet, open before, and purfled with miniver, then a deputation of aldermen, in their scarlet cloaks, and then the heads of the different civic companies, in their robes of state. Now came 12 French gentlemen, in splendid habiliments, consisting of pourpoints of white damask barred with gold, short mantles of crimson velvet lined with violet taffeta, and carnation-colored hautestichos, and took their way down the steps. They were the suite of the French ambassador, and were followed by 12 cavaliers of the suite of the Spanish ambassador, clothed in black velvet, unrelieved by any ornament. Following these came several great English nobles with their attendants. There was a flourish of trumpets within, and the prince's uncle, the future great Duke of Somerset, emerged from the gateway, arrayed in a doublet of black cloth of gold, and a cloak of crimson satin flowered with gold, and ribboned with nets of silver. He turned, doffed his plume cap, bent his body in a low reverence, and began to step backward, bowing at each step. A prolonged trumpet blast followed, and a proclamation, "Way for the high and mighty the Lord Edward, Prince of Wales." High aloft on the palace walls a long line of red tongues of flame leapt forth with a thunder crash. The mess whirled on the river burst into a mighty roar of welcome, and Tom Canty, the cause and hero of it all, stepped into view and slightly bowed his princely head. Chapter 10. The Prince in the Toils. "Thou wilt meddle, wilt thou? Then have thy reward." His cudgel crashed down upon the meddler's head. There was a groan, a dim form sank to the ground among the feet of the crowd, and the next moment it lay there in the dark alone. The mob pressed on, their enjoyment nothing disturbed by this episode. The insulted blood mounted to the little prince's cheek once more, and he lifted a steady and indignant gaze to the man's face and said, "Oh, poor Tom, poor lad." The mother fell on her knees before the prince, put her hands upon his shoulders, and gazed yearningly into his face through her rising tears. Then she said, The prince looked into her face and said gently. The prince shook his head and reluctantly said. The woman sank back to a sitting posture on the floor and, covering her eyes with her hands, gave way to heartbroken sobs and wailings. He followed this with another horse laugh. The girls began to plead timidly for their brother, and Nan said, "And thou wilt but let him to bed. Father, rest and sleep will heal his madness. Prithee, do." The prince said, "Offend me not with thy sordid matters. I tell thee again I am the king's son. Thou shalt not suffer for me. Madam, let these swine do their will upon me alone." This speech infuriated the swine to such a degree that they set about their work without waste of time. Between them they belabored the boy right soundly, and then gave the girls and their mother a beating for showing sympathy for the victim. "Now," said Canty, "to bed, all of ye. The entertainment has tired me." The light was put out, and the family retired. As soon as the snorings of the head of the house and his mother showed that they were asleep, the young girls crept to where the prince lay, and covered him tenderly from the cold with straw and rags, And their mother crept to him also, and stroked his hair, and cried over him, whispering broken words of comfort and compassion in his ear the while. She had saved a morsel for him to eat, also, but the boy's pains had swept away all appetite, at least for black and tasteless crusts. He was touched by a brave and costly defense of him, and by her commiseration, and he thanked her in very noble and princely words, and begged her to go to her sleep and try to forget her sorrows. And he added that the king his father would not let her loyal kindness and devotion go unrewarded. This return to his madness broke her heart anew, and she strained him to her breast again and again, and then went back, drowned in tears, to her bed. At last she perceived that there was not going to be any peace for her until she should devise a test that should prove, clearly and without question, whether this lad was a son or not, and so banish these wearing and worrying doubts. Ah, yes, this was plainly the right way out of the difficulty. Therefore she set her wits to work at once to contrive that test. But it was an easier thing to propose than to accomplish. She turned over in her mind one promising test after another, but was obliged to relinquish them all. None of them were absolutely sure, absolutely perfect, and an imperfect one could not satisfy her. Evidently she was racking her head in vain. It seemed manifest that she must give the matter up. Since that day, when he was little, that the powder burst in his face, he had never been startled of a sudden out of his dreams or out of his thinkings, but he had cast his hand before his eyes, even as he did that day, and not as others would do it, with the palm inward, but always with the palm turned outward. I have seen 100 times, and it hath never varied nor ever failed. Yes, I shall soon know, now. By this time she had crept to the slumbering boy's side, with the candle, shaded, in her hand. She bent heedfully and warily over him, scarcely breathing in her suppressed excitement, and suddenly flashed a light in his face and struck the floor by his ear with her knuckles. The sleeper's eyes sprang wide open, and he cast a startled stare about him, but he made no special movement with his hands. The poor woman was smitten almost helpless with surprise and grief, but she contrived to hide her emotions and to soothe the boy to sleep again. Then she crept apart and communed miserably with herself upon the disastrous result of her experiment. She tried to believe that her Tom's madness had banished this habitual gesture of his, but she could not do it. No, she said, his hands are not mad. They could not unlearn so old a habit in so brief a time. Oh, this is a heavy day for me. Still, hope was as stubborn now as doubt had been before. She could not bring herself to accept the verdict of the test. She must try the thing again. The failure must have been only an accident. So she startled the boy out of his sleep a second and a third time, at intervals, with the same result which had marked the first test. Then she dragged herself to bed and fell sorrowfully asleep, saying, "But I cannot get him up. Oh no, I cannot. He must be my boy." Sir William, after a moment, "What aileth thee?" asked a whisper near him. "Who art thou calling?" "I? Who should I be, but thy sister Nan?" "Oh, Tom, I had forgot. Thou art mad yet. Poor lad, thou art mad yet. Would I had never woke to know it again. But prithee master thy tongue, lest we be all beaten till we die." The startled prince sprang partly up, but a sharp reminder from his stiffened bruises brought him to himself, and he sank back among his foul straw with a moan and the ejaculation. In a moment all the heavy sorrow and misery which sleep had banished were upon him again, and he realized that he was no longer a petted prince in a palace, with the adoring eyes of a nation upon him, but a pauper, an outcast, clothed in rags, prisoner in a den fit only for beasts, and consorting with beggars and thieves. In the midst of his grief he began to be conscious of hilarious noises and shoutings, apparently but a block or two away. The next moment there were several sharp raps at the door. John Canty ceased from snoring and said, "Who knocketh? What wilt thou?" A voice answered, "Know thou who it was thou laid thy cudgel on?" "No, neither know I, nor care. Belike thou wilt change thy note eftsoons. An thou would save thy neck, nothing but flight may stead thee. The man is this moment delivering up the ghost. 'Tis a priest, Father Andrew." "God have mercy," exclaimed Canty. He roused his family, and hoarsely commanded, "Up with ye all and fly. or bide where ye at and perish." Scarcely 5 minutes later, the Canty household were in the street and flying for their lives. John Canty held the prince by the wrist and hurried him along the dark way, giving him this caution in a low voice: "Mind thy tongue, thou mad fool, and speak not our name. I will choose me a new name, speedily, to throw the law's dogs off the scent. Mind thy tongue, I tell thee." He growled these words to the rest of the family: "If it so chance that we be separated, let each make for London Bridge. Whoso findeth himself as far as the last linen draper's shop on the bridge, let him tarry there till the others be come. Then will we flee into Southwark together." At this moment the party burst suddenly out of darkness into light, and not only into light, but into the midst of a multitude of singing, dancing, and shouting people massed together on the river frontage. There was a line of bonfires stretching as far as one could see, up and down the Thames. London Bridge was illuminated. Southwark Bridge likewise. The entire river was aglow with the flash and sheen of colored lights, and constant explosions of fireworks filled the skies with an intricate commingling of shooting splendors and a thick rain of dazzling sparks that almost turned night into day. Everywhere were crowds of revelers. All London seemed to be at large. "Nay, whither so fast, friend? Dost canker thy soul with sordid business, when all that belial men and true make holiday?" "Mine affairs are mine own, they concern thee not," answered Canty, roughly. "Take away thy hand and let me pass." "Sit that is thy humour. Thou'lt not pass till thou hast drunk to the Prince of Wales. I tell thee that," said the waterman, barring the way resolutely. "Give me the cup, then, and make speed, make speed." Other revellers were interested by this time. They cried out, "The loving cup, the loving cup. Make the sour knave drink the loving cup, else will we feed him to the fishes." He very soon realized this fact, and straightway busied himself about his own affairs without further thought of John Canty. He quickly realized another thing, too, to wit, that a spurious Prince of Wales was being feasted by the city in his stead. He easily concluded that the pauper lad, Tom Canty, had deliberately taken advantage of his stupendous opportunity and become a usurper. Therefore there was but one course to pursue: find his way to the Guildhall, make himself known, and denounce the impostor. He also made up his mind that Tom should be allowed a reasonable time for spiritual preparation, and then be hanged, drawn, and quartered, according to the law and usage of the day in cases of high treason. Chapter 11. At Guildhall, the royal barge, attended by its gorgeous fleet, took its stately way down the Thames through the wilderness of illuminated boats. The air was laden with music. The river banks would be ruffled with joy flames. The distant city lay in a soft luminous glow from its countless invisible bonfires. Above it rose many a slender spire into the sky, encrusted with sparkling lights, wherefore in their remoteness they seemed like jeweled lances thrust aloft, as the fleet swept along. It was greeted from the banks with a continuous hoarse roar of cheers and the ceaseless flash and boom of artillery. To Tom Canty, half buried in his silken cushions, these sounds and this spectacle were a wonder unspeakably sublime and astonishing. To his little friends at his side, the Princess Elizabeth and the Lady Jane Grey, they were nothing. Arrived at the Dowgate, the fleet was towed up the limpid Walbrook, whose channel has now been for 2 centuries buried out of sight under acres of buildings, to Buckler's Bury, past houses, and under bridges populous with merrymakers and brilliantly lighted, and at last came to a halt in a basin where now is Barge Yard, in the centre of the ancient city of London. Tom disembarked, and he and his gallant procession crossed Cheapside and made a short march through the Old Jewry and Basinghall Street to the Guildhall. Space being made, presently entered a baron and an earl apparelled after the Turkish fashion in long robes of baldkin powdered with gold, hats on their heads of crimson velvet, with great rolls of gold, girded with 2 swords, called scimitars, hanging by great baldricks of gold. Next came yet another baron and another earl, in 2 long gowns of yellow satin, traversed with white satin, and in every bend of white was a bend of crimson satin, after the fashion of Russia, with furred hats of grey on their heads, either of them having an hatchet in their hands, and boots with pikes, points a foot long, turned up. Other taunts followed. Added mocking stung him, and he exclaimed, I tell ye again, you pack of unmanly curs, I am the Prince of Wales, and all forlorn and friendless as I be, with none to give me word of grace or help me in my need, yet will not I be driven from my ground, but will maintain it. Though thou be prince or no prince, 'tis all one, thou be'st a gallant lad, and not friendless neither. Here stand I by thy side to prove it. And mind, I tell thee, thou mightest have a worse friend than Miles Hendon, and yet not tire thy legs with seeking. Rest thy small jaw, my child. I talk the language of these base kennel rats like to a very native. His moments seemed numbered, his destruction certain, when suddenly a trumpet blast sounded, a voice shouted, "Way for the king's messenger," and a troop of horsemen came charging down upon the mob, who fled out of harm's reach as fast as their legs could carry them. The bold stranger caught up the prince in his arms, and was soon far away from danger and the multitude. Return we within the guildhall. Suddenly, high above the jubilant roar and thunder of the revel, broke the clear peal of a bugle note. There was instant silence, a deep hush. Then a single voice rose, that of the messenger from the palace, and began to pipe forth the proclamation, the whole multitude standing listening. The closing words, solemnly pronounced, were, "The king is dead." The great assemblage bent their heads upon their breasts with one accord, remained so, in profound silence, a few moments. Then all sank upon their knees in a body, stretched out their hands toward Tom, and a mighty shout burst forth that seemed to shake the building. Long live the king! Poor Tom's dazed eyes wandered abroad over this stupefying spectacle, and finally rested dreamily upon the kneeling princesses beside him a moment, then upon the Earl of Hertford. A sudden purpose dawned in his face. He said, in a low tone, at Lord Hertford's ear, "Answer me truly, on thy faith and honor. Uttered I here a command, the which none but a king might hold privilege and prerogative to utter? Would such commandment be obeyed, and none rise up to say me nay?" "None, my liege, in all these realms. In thy person bides the majesty of England. Thou art the king, thy word is law." Tom responded, in a strong, earnest voice, and with great animation, "Then shall the king's law be law of mercy, from this day, and nevermore be law of blood. Up from thy knees and away, to the Tower, and say the king decrees the Duke of Norfolk shall not die." The words were caught up and carried eagerly from lip to lip far and wide over the hall, and as Hertford hurried from the presence, another prodigious shout burst forth. "The reign of blood is ended. Long live Edward, King of England!" As soon as Miles Hendon and the little prince were clear of the mob, they struck down through back lanes and alleys toward the river. Their way was unobstructed until they approached London Bridge. Then they plowed into the multitude again, Hendon keeping a fast grip upon the prince's, no, the king's, wrist. The tremendous news was already abroad, and the boy learned it from 1,000 voices at once. The king is dead. The tidings struck a chill to the heart of the poor little waif, and sent a shudder through his frame. He realized the greatness of his loss, and was filled with a bitter grief, for the grim tyrant who had been such a terror to others had always been gentle with him. The tears sprang to his eyes and blurred all objects. For an instant he felt himself the most forlorn, outcast, and forsaken of God's creatures. Then another cry shook the night with its far-reaching thunders. "Long live King Edward VI!" And this made his eyes kindle, and thrilled him with pride to his fingers' ends. "Ah," he thought, "how grand and strange it seems. I am king." Our friends threaded their way slowly through the throngs upon the bridge. This structure, which had stood for 600 years, and had been a noisy and populous thoroughfare all that time, was a curious affair, for a closely packed rank of stores and shops, with family quarters overhead, stretched along both sides of it, from one bank of the river to the other. The bridge was a sort of town to itself. It had its inn, its beer houses, its bakeries, its haberdasheries, its food markets, its manufacturing industries, and even its church. It looked upon the two neighbors which it linked together, London and Southwark, as being well enough as suburbs, but not otherwise particularly important. It was a close corporation, so to speak. It was a narrow town, of a single street a fifth of a mile long. Its population was but a village population, and everybody in it knew all his fellow townsmen intimately, and had known their fathers and mothers before them, and all their little family affairs into the bargain. It had its aristocracy, of course, its fine old families of butchers and bakers and what-not, who had occupied the same old premises for 500 or 600 years, and knew the great history of the bridge from beginning to end, and all its strange legends, and who always talked bridgy talk, and thought bridgy thoughts, and lied in a long, level, direct, substantial bridgy way. And so they were, in effect, at least they could exhibit from their windows, and did, for consideration, when never returning king or hero gave a fleeting splendor, for there was no place like it for affording a long, straight, uninterrupted view of marching columns. In the times of which we are writing, the bridge furnished object lessons in English history for its children, namely, the livid and decaying heads of renowned men impaled upon iron spikes atop of its gateways. But we digress. Hendon's lodgings were in the little inn on the bridge. As he neared the door with his small friend, a rough voice said, "So, thou art he come at last. Thou'lt he not escape again, I warn thee. And if pounding thy bones to a pudding can teach thee somewhat, thou'lt he not keep us waiting another time, mayhap." And John Canty put out his hand to seize the boy. Miles Hendon stepped in the way and said, "Not too fast, friend. Thou art needlessly rough, methinks. What is a lad to thee? If it be any business of thine to make and meddle in others' affairs, he is my son." "'Tis a lie," cried the little king, hotly, boldly said, "and I believe thee, whether thy small headpiece be sound or cracked, my boy. But whether this scurvy ruffian be thy father or no, 'tis all one. He shall not have thee to beat thee in abuse, according to his threat, so thou prefer to bide with me." I do. I know him not. I loathe him, and will die before I will go with him." "Then 'tis settled, and there is naught more to say." "We will see. As to that," exclaimed John Canty, striding past Hendon to get at the boy, "by force shall he. If thou do but touch him, thou animated offal, I will spit thee like a goose," said Hendon, barring the way and laying his hand upon his sword hilt. Canty drew back. "Now mark ye," continued Hendon, "I took this lad under my protection when a mob such as thou would have mishandled him, mayhap killed him. Dost imagine I will desert him now to a worse fate? For whether thou art his father or no, and sooth to say, I think it is a lie, a decent swift death were better for such a lad than life in such brute hands as thine. So go thy ways, and set quick about it, for I like not much bandying of words, being not over patient in my nature." John Canty moved off, muttering threats and curses, and was swallowed from sight in the crowd. Hendon ascended 3 flights of stairs to his room, with his charge, after ordering a meal to be sent thither. It was a poor apartment, with a shabby bed and some odds and ends of old furniture in it, and was vaguely lighted by a couple of sickly candles. The little king dragged himself to the bed and lay down upon it, almost exhausted with hunger and fatigue. He had been on his feet a good part of a day and a night, for it was now 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and had eaten nothing meantime. He murmured drowsily, "Prithee call me when the table is spread," and sank into a deep sleep immediately. A smile twinkled in Hendon's eye, and he said to himself, "By the mass, the little beggar takes to one's quarters and usurps one's bed with as natural and easy a grace as if he owned them, with never a by your leave or so please at you, or anything of the sort." In his diseased ravings he called himself the Prince of Wales, and bravely doth he keep up the character. Poor little friendless rat! Doubtless his mind has been disordered with ill usage. Well, I will be his friend. I have saved him, and it draweth me strongly to him. Already I love the bold-tongued little rascal. How soldier-like he faced the smutty rebel and flung back his high defiance. And what a comely, sweet, and gentle face he hath, now that sleep hath conjured away its troubles and its griefs. I will teach him. I will cure his malady. Yea, I will be his elder brother, and care for him and watch over him. And whoso would shame him or do him hurt may order his shroud, for though I be burnt for it, he shall need it." He bent over the boy and contemplated him with kind and pitying interest, tapping the young cheek tenderly and smoothing back the tangled curls with his great brown hand. A slight shiver passed over the boy's form. Hendon muttered, See, now, how like a man it was to let him lie he uncovered and fill his body with deadly rheums. Now what shall I do? To awake him to take him up and put him within the bed, and he sorely needeth sleep. He looked about for extra covering, but finding none, doffed his doublet and wrapped the lad in it, saying, I am used to nipping air and scant apparel. 'Tis little I shall mind the cold. Then walked up and down the room, to keep his blood in motion, soliloquizing as before. His injured mind persuades him he is Prince of Wales. 'Twill be odd to have a Prince of Wales still with us, now that he that was a prince is prince no more, but king, for this poor mind is set upon the one fantasy, and will not reason out that now it should cast by the prince and call itself a king. If my father liveth still, after these 7 years that I have heard naught from home in my foreign dungeon, he will welcome the poor lad and give him generous shelter for my sake. So will my good elder brother, Arthur, my other brother, Hugh, but I will crack his crown and he interfere, the fox-hearted, ill-conditioned animal. Yes, thither will we fare, and straightway, too. A servant entered with a smoking meal, disposed it upon a small deal table, placed a chaise, and took his departure, leaving such cheap lodgers as these to wait upon themselves. The door slammed after him, and the noise woke the boy, who sprang to a sitting posture, and shot a glad glance about him. Then a grieved look came into his face, and he murmured to himself, with a deep sigh, Alack, it was but a dream, woe is me. Next he noticed Miles Hendon's doublet, glanced from that to Hendon, comprehended the sacrifice that had been made for him, and said, gently, Thou art good to me. Yes, thou art very good to me. Take it and put it on. I shall not need it more. Then he got up and walked to the washstand in the corner and stood there, waiting. Hendon said in a cheery voice, We'll have a right hearty sup and bite, now, for everything is savory and smoking hot, and that and thy nap together will make thee a little man again, never fear. The boy made no answer, but bent a steady look, that was filled with grave surprise, and also somewhat touched with impatience, upon the tall knight of the sword. Hendon was puzzled, and said, What's amiss? Good, sir, I would wash me. Oh, is that all? Ask no permission of Miles Hendon for aught thou cravest. Make thyself perfectly free here, and welcome with all that are his belongings. Still the boy stood, and moved not. More, he tapped the floor once or twice with his small impatient foot. Hendon was wholly perplexed. Said he, Bless us, what is it? Prithee pour the water, and make not so many words. Forbear, would sit in the presence of the king. This blow staggered Hendon to his foundations. He muttered to himself, Lo, the poor thing's madness is up with the time. It hath changed with a great change that has come to the realm, and now in fancy is he king. Good lack, I must humour the conceit, too. There is no other way. Faith, he would order me to the Tower, else. And pleased with this jest, he removed the chair from the table, took his stand behind the king, and proceeded to wait upon him in the courtliest way he was capable of. While the king ate, the rigor of his royal dignity relaxed a little, and with his growing contentment came a desire to talk. He said, I think thou carest thyself, Miles Hendon, if I heard thee aright. Yes, sire, Miles replied, then observed to himself, If I must humour the poor lad's madness, I must sire him, I must majesty him, I must not go by halves, I must stick at nothing that belongeth to the part one play, else shall I play it ill and work evil to this charitable and kindly cause. The king warmed his heart with a second glass of wine, and said, I would know thee. Tell me thy story. Thou hast a gallant way with thee, and a noble, art nobly born. I loved her, and she loved me, but she was betrothed to Arthur from the cradle, and Sir Richard would not suffer the contract to be broken. Arthur loved another maid, and bade us be of good cheer and hold fast to the hope that delay and luck together would some day give success to our several causes. Hugh loved the Lady Edith's fortune, though in truth he said it was herself he loved, but then 'twas his way, alway, to say the one thing and mean the other. But he lost his arts upon the girl. He could deceive my father, but none else. My father loved him best of us all, and trusted and believed him. for he was the youngest child, and others hated him, these qualities being in all ages sufficient to win a parent's dearest love. And he had a smooth, persuasive tongue, with an admirable gift of lying, and these be qualities which do mightily assist a blind affection to cousin itself. I was wild. In troth I might go yet farther and say very wild, though 'twas a wildness of an innocent sort, since it hurt none but me, brought shame to none, nor loss, nor had in it any taint of crime or baseness, or what might not beseem mine honourable degree. Yet did my brother Hugh turn these faults to good account, he seeing that our brother Arthur's health was but indifferent, and hoping the worst might work and profit were I swept out of the path. So, but 'twere a long tale, good my liege, and little worth the telling. Briefly, then, this brother did deftly magnify my faults and make them crimes, ending his base work with finding a silken letter in mine apartments, conveyed thither by his own means, and did convince my father by this, and suborn evidence of servants and other lying knaves, that I was minded to carry off my Edith and marry with her in rank defiance of his will. Thou hast been shamefully abused, said the little king, with a flashing eye, but I will right thee, by the cross will I. The king has said it. The king spoke, in a thoughtful, measured voice. Thou didst save me injury and shame, perchance my life, and so my crown. Such service demandeth rich reward. Name thy desire, and so it be within the compass of my royal power, it is thine. This fantastic suggestion startled Hendon out of his reverie. He was about to thank the king and put the matter aside with saying he had only done his duty and desired no reward, but a wiser thought came into his head, and he asked leave to be silent a few moments and consider the gracious offer, an idea which the king gravely approved, remarking that it was best to be not too hasty with a thing of such great import. King John restored de Courcy's titles and possessions, and said, Name thy wish, and thou shalt have it, though it cost me half my kingdom. Whereat de Courcy, kneeling, as I do now, made answer, Then I ask, my liege, that I and my successors may have and hold the privilege of remaining covered in the presence of the kings of England, henceforth while the throne shall last. The boon was granted, as your majesty knoweth, and there have been no time, these 400 years, that line has failed of an A, and so, even unto this day, the head of that ancient house still weareth his hat or helm before the king's majesty, without let or hindrance, and this none other may do. Invoking this precedent in aid of my prayer, I beseech the king to grant me but this one grace and privilege, to my more than sufficient reward, and none other, to wit, that I and my heirs, for ever, may sit in the presence of the majesty of England. And to me, also, in one way, it is not a falsity, for it reflects with truth the sweet and generous spirit that is in him. After a pause, what if he should call me by my fine title before folk? There'd be a merry contrast betwixt my glory and my raiment. But no matter, let him call me what he will. So it please him, I shall be content. Chapter 13. The disappearance of the prince. A heavy drowsiness presently fell upon the two comrades. The king said, Hendon disappeared the boy without dissent or remark, tucked him up in bed, then glanced about the room, saying to himself, ruefully, he had taken my bed again, as before. Mary, what shall I do? The little king observed his perplexity, and dissipated it with a word. He said, sleepily, Thou wilt sleep athwart the door, and guard it. In a moment more he was out of his troubles, in a deep slumber. Dear heart, he should have been born a king, muttered Hendon, admiringly. He played the part to a marvel. Then he stretched himself across the door, on the floor, saying contentedly, I have lodged worse for 7 years. 'Twould be but a gratitude to him above to find fault with this. 'Tis done, now, my liege, said Hendon. I have a bit of business outside, but will presently return. Sleep thou again, thou needest it. There, let me cover thy head also, thou wilt be warm the sooner. The king was back in dreamland before the speech was ended. Miles slipped softly out, and slipped as softly in again, in the course of 30 or 40 minutes, with a complete second-hand suit of boys' clothing, of cheap material, and showing signs of wear, but tidy and suited to the season of the year. He seated himself and began to overhaul his purchase, mumbling to himself, "A longer purse would have got a better sort, but when one has not the long purse, one must be content with what a short one may do. There was a woman in our town did dwell." He stirred, methinks. I must sing in a less thunderous key. 'Tis not good to mar his sleep with his journey before him, and he so wearied out, poor chap. This garment, 'tis well enough. A stitch here and another one there will set it aright. This other is better, albeit a stitch or two will not come amiss in it. Likewise, these be very good and sound, and will keep his small feet warm and dry, an odd new thing to him. Belike, since he has doubtless been used to foot at bay, winters and summers the same. Would thread were bread, seeing one getteth a year's efficiency for a farthing, and such a brave big needle without cost, for mere love. Now shall I have the demon's own time to thread it. The inn is paid, the breakfast that is to come included, and there is wherewithal left to buy a couple of donkeys and meet our little cost for the 2 or 3 days betwixt this and the plenty that awaits us at Hendon-Hall. She loved her whos. Body o' me, I have driven the needle under my nail. It matters little. 'Tis not a novelty, yet 'tis not a convenience, neither. We shall be merry there. Little one, never doubt it. Thy troubles will vanish there, and likewise thy sad distemper. She loved her husband dearly, but another man. These be noble large stitches. Holding the garment up and viewing it admiringly, they have a grandeur and a majesty that do cause these small stingy ones of the tailor-man to look mightily paltry and plebeian. She loved her husband dearly, but another man he loved she. Mary, 'tis done, a goodly piece of work, too, and wrought with expedition. Now will I wake him, apparel him, pour for him, feed him, and then will we hie us to the mart by the Tabard and in Southwark and be pleased arise. My liege, he answereth not. What ho, my liege, of a truth must I profane his sacred person with a touch, so his slumber is deaf to speech. What? He threw back the covers. The boy was gone. Explain, thou limb of Satan, or thy time is come, roared the man of war, and made so savage a spring toward the waiter that this latter could not find his tongue, for the instant, for fright and surprise. Where's the boy? In disjointed and trembling syllables the man gave the information desired. You were hardly gone from the place, your worship, when a youth came running and said it was your worship's will that the boy come to you straight, at the bridge end on the Southwark side. I brought him hither, and when he woke the lad and gave his message, the lad did grumble some little for being disturbed so early, as he called it, but straightway trussed on his rags and went with the youth, only saying it had been better manners that your worship came yourself, not send a stranger, and so. I know not, good your worship. I saw the youth meddle with them, he that came for the boy. All alone, your worship. Art sure, your worship. Collect thy scattered wits, bethink thee, take time, man. After a moment's thought, the servant said, when he came, none came with him, but now I remember me that as the two stepped into the throng of the bridge, a ruffian-looking man plunged out from some near place, and just as he was joining them. What then? Out with it, thundered the impatient Hendon, interrupting. Just then the crowd lapped him up and closed him in, and I saw no more, being called by my master, who was in a rage because a joint that the scrivener had ordered was forgot, though I take all the saints to witness that to blame me for that miscarriage were like holding the unborn babe to judgment for sins calm. Even so, your worship, for, as I said before, as to that detestable joint, the babe unborn is no whit more blameless than. Art here yet, and prating still. Vanish, lest I throttle thee. The servitor vanished. Hendon followed after him, past him, and plunged down the stairs 2 steps at a stride, muttering, "'Tis that scurvy villain that claimed he was his son. I have lost thee, my poor little mad master. It is a bitter thought, and I had come to love thee so. No, by book and bell, not lost, for I will ransack the land till I find thee again." Chapter 14. Leroyus Mort, Vive le Roi. Toward daylight of the same morning, Tom Canty stirred out of a heavy sleep and opened his eyes in the dark. He lay silent a few moments, trying to analyze his confused thoughts and impressions and get some sort of meaning out of them. Then suddenly he burst out in a rapturous but guarded voice. A dim form appeared at his side, and a voice said, "Wilt deign to deliver thy commands?" "Commands? Oh, woe is me, I know thy voice. Speak thou. Who am I?" Tom buried his head among his pillows, murmuring plaintively, "Alack, it was no dream. Go to thy rest. Sweet sir, leave me to my sorrows." Tom slept again, and after a time he had this pleasant dream. He thought it was summer, and he was playing, all alone, in the fair meadow called Goodman's Fields, when a dwarf only a foot high, with long red whiskers and a humped back, appeared to him suddenly and said, "Deed by that stump." He did so, and found 12 bright new pennies, wonderful riches. Yet this was not the best of it, for the dwarf said. Then the dwarf vanished, and Tom flew to Offal Court with his prize, saying to himself, "Every night will I give my father a penny. He will think I begged it. It will glad his heart, and I shall no more be beaten. 1 penny every week the good priest that teacheth me shall have, mother, Nan, and Bet the other 4. We be done with hunger and rags. Now, done with fears and frets and savage usage." In his dream he reached his sordid home all out of breath, but with eyes dancing with grateful enthusiasm, cast 4 of his pennies into his mother's lap and cried out, "They are for thee, all of them, every one, for thee and Nan and Bet, and honestly come by, not begged nor stolen." The happy and astonished mother strained him to her breast and exclaimed, "It waxeth late. May it please your majesty to rise." He opened his eyes. The richly clad first lord of the bedchamber was kneeling by his couch. The gladness of the lying dream faded away. The poor boy recognized that he was still a captive and a king. The room was filled with courtiers clothed in purple mantles, the morning color, and with noble servants of the monarch. Tom sat up in bed and gazed out from the heavy silken curtains upon this fine company. The weighty business of dressing began, and one courtier after another knelt and paid his court and offered to the little king his condolences upon his heavy loss. Whilst the dressing proceeded, in the beginning, a shirt was taken up by the chief equerry in waiting, who passed it to the first lord of the buckhounds, who passed it to the second gentleman of the bedchamber, who passed it to the head ranger of Windsor Forest, who passed it to the third groom of the stole, who passed it to the Chancellor Royal of the Duchy of Lancaster, who passed it to the Master of the Wardrobe, who passed it to Norroy King at Arms, who passed it to the Constable of the Tower, who passed it to the Chief Steward of the Household, who passed it to the Hereditary Grand Diaper, who passed it to the Lord High Admiral of England, who passed it to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who passed it to the First Lord of the Bedchamber, who took what was left of it, and put it on Tom. Poor little wondering chap. It reminded him of passing buckets at a fire. The weighty business of dressing began, and one courtier after another knelt and paid his court and offered to the little king his condolences upon his heavy loss. Whilst the dressing proceeded, each garment in its turn had to go through the slow and solemn process. Consequently, Tom grew very weary of the ceremony, so weary that he felt an almost gushing gratefulness when he at last saw his long silken hose begin the journey down the line and knew that the end of the matter was drawing near. But he exulted too soon. The first lord of the bedchamber received the hose and was about to encase Tom's legs in them, when a sudden flush invaded his face, and he hurriedly hustled the things back into the hands of the Archbishop of Canterbury with an astounded look and a whispered, "See, my lord," pointing to a something connected with the hose. The Archbishop paled, then flushed, and passed the hose to the Lord High Admiral, whispering, "See, my lord." The Admiral passed the hose to the Hereditary Grand Diaper, and had hardly breath enough in his body to ejaculate, "See, my lord." The hose drifted backward along the line, to the Chief Steward of the Household, the Constable of the Tower, Norroy King at Arms, the Master of the Wardrobe, the Chancellor Royal of the Duchy of Lancaster, the third groom of the stole, the head ranger of Windsor Forest, the second gentleman of the bedchamber, the first lord of the buckhounds, accompanied always with an amazed and frightened "See, see." till they finally reached the hands of the chief equerry in waiting, who gazed a moment with a pallid face upon what had caused all this dismay, then hoarsely whispered, "Body of my life, a tag gone from a truss point to the tower with the head keeper of the king's hose." After which he leaned upon the shoulder of the first lord of the buckhounds to regather his vanished strength whilst fresh hose, without any damaged strings to them, were brought. Each garment in its turn had to go through this slow and solemn process. Consequently, Tom grew very weary of the ceremony. So weary that he felt an almost gushing gratefulness when he at last saw his long silken hose begin the journey down the line and knew that the end of the matter was drawing near. But he exulted too soon. The first lord of the bedchamber received the hose and was about to encase Tom's legs in them, when a sudden flush invaded his face, and he hurriedly hustled the things back into the hands of the Archbishop of Canterbury with an astounded look and a whispered, "See, my lord," pointing to a something connected with the hose. After breakfast he was conducted, with regal ceremony, attended by his great officers and his guard of 50 gentlemen pensioners bearing gilt battle-axes, to the throne room, where he proceeded to transact business of state. His uncle, Lord Hertford, took his stand by the throne to assist the royal mind with wise counsel. The body of illustrious men named by the late king as his executors appeared, to ask Tom's approval of certain act of theirs, rather a form, and yet not wholly a form, since there was no protector as yet. The Archbishop of Canterbury made report of a decree of the Council of Executors concerning the obsequies of his late most illustrious Majesty, and finished by reading the signatures of the executors, to wit, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor of England, William Lord St. John, John Lord Russell, Edward Earl of Hertford, John Viscount Lisle, Cuthbert Bishop of Durham. Tom was not listening. An earlier clause of the document was puzzling him. At this point he turned and whispered to Lord Hertford. What day did he say the burial had been appointed for? "The 16th of the coming month, my liege." "'Tis a strange folly. Will he keep?" Poor chap. He was still new to the customs of royalty. He was used to seeing the forlorn dead of Offal Court hustled out of the way with a very different sort of expedition. However, the Lord Hertford set his mind at rest with a word or two. A Secretary of State presented an order of the Council appointing the morrow at 11 for the reception of the foreign ambassadors, and desired the King's assent. Tom turned an inquiring look toward Hertford, who whispered, "Your Majesty will signify consent. They come to testify their royal master's sense of the heavy calamity which have visited your grace and the realm of England." Tom did as he was bidden. Another secretary began to read a preamble concerning the expenses of the late king's household, which had amounted to £28,000 during the preceding 6 months, a sum so vast that it made Tom Canty gasp. He gasped again when the fact appeared that £20,000 of this money was still owing and unpaid, and once more when it appeared that the king's coffers were about empty, and his 1,200 servants much embarrassed for lack of the wages due them. Tom spoke out, with lively apprehension. "We be going to the dogs. 'Tis plain. 'Tis meet and necessary that we take a smaller house and set the servants at large, so they be of no value but to make delay, and trouble one with offices that harass the spirit and shame the soul, they misbecoming any but a doll, that hath nor brains nor hands to help itself withal. I remember me of a small house that standeth over against the fish market, by Billingsgate." A sharp pressure upon Tom's arm stopped his foolish tongue, and sent a blush to his face, but no countenance that betrayed any sign that this strange speech had been remarked or given concern. A secretary made report that forasmuch as the late king had provided in his will for conferring the ducal degree upon the Earl of Hertford and raising his brother, Sir Thomas Seymour, to the peerage, and likewise Hertford's son to an earldom, together with similar aggrandisements to other great servants of the crown, the council had resolved to hold a sitting on the 16th of February for the delivering and confirming of these honours, and that meantime, the late king not having granted, in writing, estate suitable to the support of these dignities, the council, knowing his private wishes in that regard, had thought proper to grant to Seymour £500 lands, and to Hertford's an £800 lands, and £300 of the next bishop's lands, which should fall vacant, his present majesty being willing. Tom was about to blurt out something about the propriety of paying the late king's debts first, before squandering all this money, but a timely touch upon his arm, from the thoughtful Hertford, saved him this indiscretion, Wherefore he gave the royal assent, without spoken comment, but with much inward discomfort, while he sat reflecting a moment over the ease with which he was doing strange and glittering miracles. A happy thought shot into his mind. Why not make his mother Duchess of Offlecourt and give her an estate? But a sorrowful thought swept it instantly away. He was only a king in name. These grave veterans and great nobles were his masters. To them his mother was only the creature of diseased mind. They would simply listen to his project with unbelieving ears, then send for the doctor. The dull work went tediously on. Petitions were read, and proclamations, patents, and all manner of wordy, repetitious, and wearisome papers relating to the public business. And at last Tom sighed pathetically and murmured to himself, "In what have I offended? That the good God should take me away from the fields and the free air and the sunshine, to shut me up here and make me a king and afflict me so." Then his poor muddled head nodded a while and presently drooped to his shoulder, and the business of the empire came to a standstill for want of that august factor, the ratifying power. Silence ensued around the slumbering child, and the sages of the realm ceased from their deliberations. "Rise, lad. Who art thou? What wouldst have?" The boy rose, and stood at graceful ease, but with an aspect of concern in his face. He said, "Of a surety thou must remember me, my lord. I am thy whipping boy." "My whipping boy?" "The same, your grace. I am Humphrey Marlowe." So he stroked his brow perplexedly a moment or two, and presently said, "Now I seem to remember thee somewhat, but my wit is clogged and dim with suffering." "Alack, my poor master," ejaculated the whipping boy, with feeling, adding to himself, "In truth, 'tis as they said, his mind is gone, alas, poor soul. But misfortune catch me, how am I forgetting? They said one must not seem to observe that aught is wrong with him. 'Tis matter of small weight, my liege, yet will I touch upon it, and it please your grace. 2 days gone by, when your majesty faltered thrice in your Greek, in the morning lessons. Dost remember it? The master, being wroth with what he termed such slovenly and doltish work, did promise that he would soundly whip me for it, and—" "Whip thee," said Tom, astonished out of his presence of mind. "Why should he whip thee for faults of mine?" "Ah, your grace forgetteth again. He always scourgeth me when thou dost fail in thy lessons." True, I had forgot. Thou teachest me in private. Then if I fail, he argued that thy office was lamely done, and— "Oh, my liege, what words are these? I, the humblest of thy servants, presume to teach thee. Then where's thy blame? What riddle is this? Am I in truth gone mad? Or is it thou? Explain, speak out. But, good your majesty, there's naught that needeth simplifying dot. None may visit the sacred person of the Prince of Wales with blows. Wherefore, when he faulteth, 'tis I that take them, and meet it is and right, for that is mine office and my livelihood." Tom stared at the tranquil boy, observing to himself, "Lo, it is a wonderful thing, a most strange and curious trade. I marvel they have not hired a boy to take my combings and my dressings for me. Would heaven they would. And they will do this thing. I will take my lashings in mine own person, giving God thanks for the change." Then he said aloud, "And hast thou been beaten, poor friend, according to the promise?" "No, good your majesty, my punishment was appointed for this day, and peradventure it may be annulled, as unbefitting the season of mourning that has come upon us. I know not, and so have made bold to come hither and remind your grace about your gracious promise to intercede in my behalf. With the master, to save thee thy whipping. Ah, thou dost remember." "Oh, thanks, my good lord," cried the boy, dropping upon his knee again. "Mayhap I have ventured far now, and yet—" Seeing Master Humphrey hesitate, Tom encouraged him to go on, saying he was in the granting mood. "Then will I speak it out, for it lieth near my heart. Sit thou art no more Prince of Wales, but king. Thou canst order matters as thou wilt, with none to say thee nay. Wherefore it is not in reason that thou wilt longer vex thyself with dreary studies, but wilt burn thy books and turn thy mind to things less irksome. Then am I ruined, and mine orphan sisters with me. Ruined? Prithee how? My beck is my bread, O my gracious liege. If it go idle, I starve, and thou cease from study mine office is gone, thou need no whipping boy. Do not turn me away. Tom was touched with his pathetic distress. He said, with a right royal burst of generosity, Discomfort thyself no further, lad. Thine office shall be permanent in thee and thy line forever. Then he struck the boy a light blow on the shoulder with the flat of his sword, exclaiming, Rise, Humphrey Marlowe, hereditary grand whipping boy to the royal house of England. Banish sorrow. I will betake me to my books again, and study so that they must in justice treble thy wage. So mightily shall the business of thine office be augmented. The grateful Humphrey responded fervidly, Thanks, O most noble master. This princely lavishness doth far surpass my most distempered dreams of fortune. Now shall I be happy all my days, and all the house of Marlowe after me. Tom had wit enough to perceive that here was a lad who could be useful to him. He encouraged Humphrey to talk, and he was nothing loath. He was delighted to believe that he was helping in Tom's cure, for always. As soon as he had finished calling back to Tom's diseased mind the various particulars of his experiences and adventures in the royal schoolroom and elsewhere about the palace, he noticed that Tom was then able to recall the circumstances quite clearly. At the end of an hour, Tom found himself well freighted with very valuable information concerning personages and matters pertaining to the court. So he resolved to draw instruction from this source daily, and to this end he would give order to admit Humphrey to the royal closet whenever he might come, provided the majesty of England was not engaged with other people. Humphrey had hardly been dismissed when my Lord Hertford arrived with more trouble for Tom. He said that the lords of the council, fearing that some overwrought report of the king's damaged health might have leaked out and got abroad, they deemed it wise and best that his majesty should begin to dine in public after a day or two. His wholesome complexion and vigorous step, assisted by a carefully guarded repose of manner and ease and grace of demeanor, would more surely quiet the general pulse, in case any evil rumors had gone about, than any other scheme that could be devised. Then the Earl proceeded, very delicately, to instruct Tom as to the observances proper to the stately occasion, under the rather thin disguise of reminding him concerning things already known to him. But to his vast gratification, it turned out that Tom needed very little help in this line. He had been making use of Humphrey in that direction, for Humphrey had mentioned that within a few days he was to begin to dine in public, having gathered it from the swift-winged gossip of the court. Tom kept these facts to himself, however. Seeing the royal memory so improved, the Earl ventured to apply a few tests to it, in an apparently casual way, to find out how far its amendment had progressed. The results were happy, here and there, in spots where Humphrey's tracks remained, and on the whole my lord was greatly pleased and encouraged. So encouraged was he, indeed, that he spoke up and said in a quiet, hopeful voice, Now am I persuaded that if your majesty will but tax your memory yet a little further, it will resolve the puzzle of the Great Seal, a loss which was of moment yesterday, although of none today, since its term of service ended with our late lord's life. May it please your grace to make the trial. Tom was at sea. A Great Seal was something which he was totally unacquainted with. After a moment's hesitation, he looked up innocently and asked, What was it like, my lord? The Earl started, almost imperceptibly, muttering to himself, Alec? His wits have flown again. It was ill wisdom to lead him on to strain them. Then he deftly turned the talk to other matters, with the purpose of sweeping the unlucky seal out of Tom's thoughts, a purpose which easily succeeded. Chapter 15. Tom as King. The next day the foreign ambassadors came, with their gorgeous trains, and Tom, throned in awful state, received them. The splendors of the scene delighted his eye and fired his imagination at first, but the audience was long and dreary, and so were most of the addresses. Wherefore, what began as a pleasure grew into weariness and homesickness by and by. Tom said the words which Hertford put into his mouth from time to time, and tried hard to acquit himself satisfactorily, but he was too new to such things, and too ill at ease to accomplish more than a tolerable success. He looked sufficiently like a king, but he was ill able to feel like one. He was cordially glad when the ceremony was ended. The larger part of his day was wasted, as he termed it, in his own mind, in labors pertaining to his royal office. Even the 2 hours devoted to certain princely pastimes and recreations were rather a burden to him than otherwise. They were so fettered by restrictions and ceremonious observances. However, he had a private hour with his whipping boy which he counted clear gain, since he got both entertainment and needful information out of it. The third day of Tom Canty's kingship came and went much as the others had done, but there was a lifting of his cloud in one way. He felt less uncomfortable than at first. He was getting a little used to his circumstances and surroundings. His chain still galled, but not all the time. He found that the presence and homage of the great afflicted and embarrassed him less and less sharply with every hour that drifted over his head. But for one single dread, he could have seen the fourth day approach without serious distress: the dining in public. It was to begin that day. There were greater matters in the program. For on that day he would have to preside at a council which would take his views and commands concerning the policy to be pursued toward various foreign nations scattered far and near over the great globe. On that day, too, Hertford would be formally chosen to the grand office of Lord Protector. Other things of note were appointed for that fourth day also, but to Tom they were all insignificant compared with the ordeal of dining all by himself with a multitude of curious eyes fastened upon him, and a multitude of mouths whispering comments upon his performance, and upon his mistakes, if he should be so unlucky as to make any. Still, nothing could stop that fourth day, and so it came. It found poor Tom low-spirited and absent-minded, and this mood continued. He could not shake it off. The ordinary duties of the morning dragged upon his hands and wearied him. Once more he felt the sense of captivity heavy upon him. Late in the forenoon he was in a large audience chamber, conversing with the Earl of Hertford and dully awaiting the striking of the hour appointed for a visit of ceremony from a considerable number of great officials and courtiers. After a little while, Tom, who had wandered to a window and become interested in the life and movement of the great highway beyond the palace gates, and not idly interested, but longing with all his heart to take part in person in its stir and freedom, saw the van of a hooting and shouting mob of disorderly men, women, and children of the lowest and poorest degree approaching from up the road. "I would I knew what 'tis about," he exclaimed, with all a boy's curiosity in such happenings. "Thou art the king," solemnly responded the Earl with a reverence. "Have I your grace's leave to act?" "Oh, blithely, yes. Oh, gladly, yes," exclaimed Tom excitedly, adding to himself with a lively sense of satisfaction. "In truth, being a king is not all dreariness. It its compensations and conveniences." The Earl called a page, and sent him to the captain of the guard with the order: "Let the mob be halted, and inquiry made concerning the occasion of its movement, by the king's command." A few seconds later a long rank of the royal guards, case in flesh and steel, filed out the gates and formed across the highway in front of the multitude. A messenger returned to report that the crowd were following a man, a woman, and a young girl to execution for crimes committed against the peace and dignity of the realm. Death, and a violent death, for these poor unfortunates. The thought wrung Tom's heartstrings. The spirit of compassion took control of him, to the exclusion of all other considerations. He never thought of the offended laws, or the grief or loss which these three criminals had inflicted upon their victims. He could think of nothing but the scaffold and the grisly fate hanging over the heads of the condemned. His concern made him even forget, for the moment, that he was but the false shadow of a king, not the substance, and before he knew it he had blurted out the command: "Bring them here." Then he blushed scarlet, and a sort of apology sprung to his lips. But observing that his order had wrought no sort of surprise in the Earl or the waiting page, he suppressed the words he was about to utter. The page, in the most matter-of-course way, made a profound obeisance and retired backwards out of the room to deliver the command. Tom experienced a glow of pride and a renewed sense of the compensating advantages of the kingly office. He said to himself, "Truly it is like what I was used to feel when I read the old priest tales, and did imagine mine own self a prince, giving law and command to all, saying, do this, do that, whilst none durst offer let or hindrance to my will." Now the doors swung open. One high-sounding title after another was announced. The personages owning them followed, and the place was quickly half-filled with noble folk and finery. But Tom was hardly conscious of the presence of these people. So wrought up was he and so intensely absorbed in that other and more interesting matter. He seated himself absently in his chair of state, and turned his eyes upon the door with manifestations of impatient expectancy, seeing which, the company forbore to trouble him, and fell to chatting a mixture of public business and court gossip one with another. In a little while the measured tread of military men was heard approaching, and the culprits entered the presence in charge of an under-sheriff and escorted by a detail of the king's guard. The civil officer knelt before Tom, then stood aside. The three doomed persons knelt also, and remained so. The guard took position behind Tom's chair. Tom scanned the prisoners curiously. Something about the dress or appearance of the man had stirred a vague memory in him. Methinks I have seen this man ere now, but the when or the where fail me. Such was Tom's thought. Just then the man glanced quickly up and quickly dropped his face again, not being able to endure the awful port of sovereignty. But the one full glimpse of the face which Tom got was sufficient. He said to himself, "Now is the matter clear. This is the stranger that plucked Giles Wit out of the Thames and saved his life, that windy, bitter, first day of the new year. A brave good deed. Pity he had been doing baser ones and got himself in the sad case. I have not forgot the day, neither the hour, by reason that an hour after, upon the stroke of 11, I did get a hiding by the hand of Mark Canty, which was of so goodly and admired severity that all that went before or followed after were but fondlings and caresses by comparison." Tom now ordered that the woman and the girl be removed from the presence for a little time, then addressed himself to the under-sheriff, saying, "Good sir, what is this man's offense?" The officer knelt, and answered, "So please your majesty, he hath taken the life of a subject by poison." Tom's compassion for the prisoner, and admiration of him as a daring rescue of a drowning boy, experienced a most damaging shock. The thing was proven upon him, he asked, most clearly, "Sire." Tom sighed, and said, "Take him away, he hath earned his death. 'Tis a pity, for he was a brave heart, and I mean he had the look of it." The prisoner clasped his hands together with sudden energy, and wrung them despairingly, at the same time appealing imploringly to the king in broken and terrified phrases. "O my lord the king, and thou canst pity the lost, have pity upon me. I am innocent, neither of that wherewith I am charged being more than but lamely proved. Yet I speak not of that. The judgment is gone forth against me, and may not suffer alteration. Yet in mine extremity I beg a boon, for my doom is more than I can bear. A grace, my lord the king. In thy royal compassion grant my prayer. Give commandment that I be hanged." Tom was amazed. This was not the outcome he had looked for. "Odds my life, a strange boon. Was it not the fate intended thee?" "Oh, good my liege, not so. It is ordered that I be boiled alive." The hideous surprise of these words almost made Tom spring from his chair. As soon as he could recover his wits, he cried out, "Have thy wish, poor soul. And thou had poisoned 100 men, thou shouldst not suffer so miserable a death." The prisoner bowed his face to the ground and burst into passionate expressions of gratitude, ending with, "If ever thou shouldst know misfortune, which God forfend, may thy goodness to me this day be remembered and requited." Tom turned to the Earl of Hertford and said, "My lord, is it believable that there was warrant for this man's ferocious doom?" "It is the law, your grace, for poisoners. In Germany coiners be boiled to death in oil, not cast in of a sudden, but by a rope let down into the oil by degrees, and slowly, first the feet, then the legs, then—" "Oh, prithee no more, my lord, I cannot bear it," cried Tom, covering his eyes with his hands to shut out the picture. "I beseech your good lordship that order be taken to change this law. Oh, let no more poor creatures be visited with its tortures." The Earl's face showed profound gratification, for he was a man of merciful and generous impulses, a thing not very common with his class in that fierce age. He said, "These your grace's noble words have sealed its doom. History will remember it to the honor of your royal house." The under-sheriff was about to remove his prisoner. Tom gave him a sign to wait. Then he said, "Good sir, I would look into this matter further. The man has said his deed was but lamely proved. Tell me what thou knowest." If the king's grace please, it did appear upon the trial that this man entered into a house in the hamlet of Islington where one lay sick. 3 witnesses say it was at 10 of the clock in the morning, and 2 say it was some minutes later, the sick man being alone at the time and sleeping, and presently the man came forth again and went his way. The sick man died within the hour, being torn with spasms and retchings. Did any see the poison given? Was poison found? Mary, no, my liege. Then how doth one know there was poison given at all? Please your majesty, the doctors testified that none died with such symptoms but by poison. Weighty evidence. This, in that simple age, Tom recognized its formidable nature, and said, The doctor knoweth his trade, belike they were right. The matter of an ill look for this poor man. Yet was not this all, your majesty, there is more and worse. Many testified that a witch, since gone from a village, none know whither, did foretell, and speak it privately in their ears, that the sick man would die by poison, and more, that a stranger would give it, a stranger with brown hair and clothed in a worn and common garb, and surely this prisoner doth answer woundily to the bill. Please your majesty to give a circumstance that solemn weight which is its due, seeing it was foretold. This was an argument of tremendous force in that superstitious day. Tom felt that the thing was settled. If evidence was worth anything, this poor fellow's guilt was proved. Still he offered the prisoner a chance, saying, If thou canst say aught in thy behalf, speak. Naught that will avail, my king. I am innocent, yet cannot I make it appear. I have no friends, else might I show that I was not in Islington that day. So also might I show that at that hour they name I was above a league away, seeing I was at Wapping Old Stays. Yet more, my king, for I could show that whilst they say I was taking life, I was saving it, a drowning boy. Peace. Sheriff, name the day the deed was done. At 10 in the morning, or some minutes later, the first day of the new year, most illustrious. Let the prisoner go free. It is a king's will. Another blush followed this unregal outburst, and he covered his indecorum as well as he could by adding, It enrageth me that a man should be hanged upon such idle, hair-brained evidence. A low buzz of admiration swept through the assemblage. It was not admiration of the decree that had been delivered by Tom, for the propriety or expediency of pardoning a convicted poisoner was a thing which few there would have felt justified in either admitting or admiring. No, the admiration was for the intelligence and spirit which Tom had displayed. Some of the low-voiced remarks were to this effect. This is no mad king. He hath his wit sound. How sanely he put his questions. How like his former natural self was his abrupt, imperious disposal of the matter. God be thanked. His infirmity is spent. This is no weakling, but a king. He hath borne himself like to his own father. The air being filled with applause, Tom's Inn necessarily caught a little of it. The effect which this had upon him was to put him greatly at his ease, and also to charge his system with very gratifying sensations. However, his juvenile curiosity soon rose superior to these pleasant thoughts and feelings. He was eager to know what sort of deadly mischief the woman and the little girl could have been about. So, by his command, the 2 terrified and sobbing creatures were brought before him. What is it that these have done? He inquired of the sheriff. Please your majesty, a black crime is charged upon them, and clearly proven, wherefore the judges have decreed, according to the law, that they be hanged. They sold themselves to the devil, such is their crime. Tom shuddered. He had been taught to abhor people who did this wicked thing. Still, he was not going to deny himself the pleasure of feeding his curiosity for all that. So he asked, Where was this done, and when? On a midnight in December, in a ruined church, your majesty. Tom shuddered again. Who was there present? Only these 2, your grace, and that other. Have these confessed? Nay, not so, sire, they do deny it. Then prithee, how was it known? Certain witness did see them wending thither. Good your majesty. This bred the suspicion, and dire effects have since confirmed and justified it. In particular, it is in evidence that through the wicked power so obtained, they did invoke and bring about a storm that wasted all the region round about. Above 40 witnesses have proved the storm, and sooth one might have had 1,000, for all had reason to remember it, sith all had suffered by it. Certes, this is a serious matter. Tom turned this dark piece of scoundrelism over in his mind a while, then asked, Suffered the woman also by the storm? Several old heads among the assemblage nodded their recognition of the wisdom of this question. The sheriff, however, saw nothing consequential in the inquiry. He answered, with simple directness, Indeed did she, your majesty, and most righteously, as all aver. Her habitation was swept away, and herself and child left shelterless. Methinks the power to do herself so ill a turn was dearly bought. She had been cheated, had she paid but farthing for it. That she paid her soul, and her child's, argueth that she is mad. If she is mad, she knoweth not what she doth, therefore sinneth not. The elderly heads nodded recognition of Tom's wisdom once more, and one individual murmured, And the king be mad himself, according to report. Then is it a madness of a sort that would improve the sanity of some I would have, if by the gentle providence of God they could but catch it. What age is the child? Asked Tom. 9 years, please your majesty. By the law of England may a child enter into covenant and sell itself, my lord? Asked Tom, turning to a learned judge. The law doth not permit a child to make or meddle in any weighty matter. Good my liege, holding that its callow wit unfitteth it to cope with the riper wit and evil schemings of them that are its elders. The devil may buy a child, if he so choose, and the child agree thereto, but not an Englishman. In this latter case a contract would be null and void. It seemeth a rude unchristian thing, and ill-contrived, that English law denieth privileges to Englishmen to waste them on the devil, cried Tom, with honest heat. This novel view of the matter excited many smiles, and was stored away in many heads to be repeated about the court as evidence of Tom's originality as well as progress toward mental health. The elder culprit had ceased from sobbing, and was hanging upon Tom's word with an excited interest and a growing hope. Tom noticed this, and it strongly inclined his sympathies toward her in a perilous and unfriended situation. Presently he asked, How wrought they to bring the storm? By pulling off their stockings, sire. This astonished Tom, and also fired his curiosity to fever heat. He said, eagerly, It is wonderful, but it always this dread effect. Always, my liege, at least if the woman desire it, and utter the needful words, either in her mind or with her tongue. Tom turned to the woman, and said with impetuous zeal, Exert thy power, I would see a storm. There was a sudden paling of cheeks in the superstitious assemblage, and a general, though unexpressed, desire to get out of the place, all of which was lost upon Tom, who was dead to everything but the proposed cataclysm. Seeing a puzzled and astonished look in the woman's face, he added, excitedly, Never fear, thou shalt be blameless. More, thou shalt go free, none shall touch thee. Exert thy power. Oh, my lord the king, I have it not, I have been falsely accused. Thy fears stay thee. Be of good heart, thou shalt suffer no harm. Make a storm. It mattereth not how small a one. I require naught great or harmful, but indeed prefer the opposite. Do this and thy life is spared. Thou shalt go out free, with thy child, bearing the king's pardon, and safe from hurt or malice from any in the realm. The woman prostrated herself, and protested, with tears, that she had no power to do the miracle, else she would gladly win her child's life alone, and be content to lose her own, if by obedience to the king's command so precious a grace might be acquired. Tom urged. The woman still adhered to her declarations. Finally he said, I think the woman has said true. And my mother were in her place and gifted with the devil's functions, she had not stayed a moment to call her storms and lay the whole land in ruins, if the saving of my forfeit life were the prize she got. It is argument that other mothers are made in like mold. Thou art free, good wife, thou and thy child, for I do think thee innocent. Now there is naught to fear, being pardoned. Pull off thy stockings, and thou canst make me a storm, thou shalt be rich. The redeemed creature was loud in her gratitude, and proceeded to obey, whilst Tom looked on with eager expectancy, a little marred by apprehension, the courtiers at the same time manifesting decided discomfort and uneasiness. The woman stripped her own feet and her little girl's also, and plainly did her best to reward the king's generosity with an earthquake. But it was all a failure and a disappointment. Tom sighed and said, "Nay, good soul, trouble thyself no further. Thy power is departed out of thee. Go thy way in peace, and if it return to thee at any time, forget me not, but fetch me a storm." Chapter 16. The State Dinner. The dinner hour drew near. Yet strangely enough, the thought brought but slight discomfort to Tom, and hardly any terror. The morning's experiences had wonderfully built up his confidence. The poor little ashcat was already more wonted to his strange garret, after 4 days' habit, than a mature person could have become in a full month. A child's facility in accommodating itself to circumstances was never more strikingly illustrated. Let us privilege one's hurry to the great banqueting room and have a glance at matters there whilst Tom is being made ready for the imposing occasion. It is a spacious apartment with gilded pillars and pilasters and pictured walls and ceilings. At the door stand tall guards, as rigid as statues, dressed in rich and picturesque costumes and bearing halberds. In a high gallery which runs all around the place is a band of musicians and a packed company of citizens of both sexes in brilliant attire. In the center of the room, upon a raised platform, is Tom's table. Now let the ancient chronicler speak. A gentleman enters the room bearing a rod, and along with him another bearing a tablecloth, which, after they have both kneeled 3 times with the utmost veneration, he spreads upon the table, and after kneeling again they both retire. Then come 2 others, one with the rod again, the other with a salt cellar, a plate, and bread. When they have kneeled as the others had done, and placed what was brought upon the table, they too retire with the same ceremonies performed by the first. At last come 2 nobles, richly clothed, one bearing a tasting knife, who, after prostrating themselves 3 times in the most graceful manner, approach and rub the table with bread and salt, with as much as if the king had been present. So end the solemn preliminaries. Now, far down the echoing corridors we hear a bugle blast, and the indistinct cry, "Place for the king, way for the king's most excellent majesty." These sounds are momently repeated. They grow nearer and nearer, and presently, almost in our faces, the martial note peals and the cry rings out, "Way for the king." At this instant the shining pageant appears, and files in at the door with a measured march. Let the chronicler speak again. First come gentlemen, barons, earls, knights of the Garter, all richly dressed and bareheaded. Next comes the chancellor, between 2, one of which carries the royal scepter, the other the sword of state in a red scabbard, studded with golden fleur-de-lis, the point upwards. Next comes the king himself, whom, upon his appearing, 12 trumpets and many drums salute with a great burst of welcome, whilst all in the galleries rise in their places, crying, "God save the king." After him come nobles attached to his person, and on his right and left march his guard of honor, his 50 gentlemen pensioners, with gilt battle-axes. This was all fine and pleasant. Tom's pulse beat high, and a glad light was in his eye. He bore himself right gracefully, and all the more so because he was not thinking of how he was doing it, his mind being charmed and occupied with the blithe sights and sounds about him. And besides, nobody can be very ungraceful in nicely fitting beautiful clothes after he has grown a little used to them, especially if he is for the moment unconscious of them. Tom remembered his instructions, and acknowledged his greeting with a slight inclination of his plumed head, and a courteous, "I thank ye, my good people." He seated himself at table, without removing his cap, and did it without the least embarrassment. For to eat with one's cap on was the one solitary royal custom upon which the kings and the Cantys met upon common ground, neither party having any advantage over the other in the matter of old familiarity with it. The pageant broke up and grouped itself picturesquely, and remained bareheaded. Now to the sound of gay music the yeomen of the guard entered, the tallest and mightiest men in England, they being carefully selected in this regard, but we will let the chronicler tell about it. The yeomen of the guard entered, bareheaded, clothed in scarlet, with golden roses upon their backs, and these went and came, bringing in each turn a course of dishes, served in plate. These dishes were received by gentlemen in the same order they were brought, and placed upon the table, while the taster gave to each guard a mouthful to eat of the particular dish he had brought, for fear of any poison. Tom made a good dinner. Notwithstanding, he was conscious that hundreds of eyes followed each morsel to his mouth, and watched him eat it with an interest which could not have been more intense if it had been a deadly explosive, and was expected to blow him up and scatter him all about the place. He was careful not to hurry, and equally careful not to do anything whatever for himself, but wait till the proper official knelt down and did it for him. He got through without mistake, flawless and precious triumph. When the meal was over at last, and he marched away in the midst of his bright pageant, with the happy noises in his ears of blaring bugles, rolling drums, and thundering acclamations, he felt that if he had seen the worst of dining in public, it was an ordeal which he would be glad to endure several times a day if by that means he could but buy himself free from some of the more formidable requirements of his royal office.